Prometheus possesses three vital characteristics of the Overman, as Nietzsche conceptualized him: amor fati, or love of one's fate, an excess of strength and power, and the willingness to sacrifice himself in the creation of something higher. Prometheus knew that Zeus would condemn him to a fate of eternal torment for the crime of stealing fire. Yet despite this foreknowledge, he chose to lift humanity out of the mud by giving them the gift of fire and civilization. By accepting his fate and even charging towards it, Prometheus affirms life. To see life as a divine tragedy ordained by fate, each moment foretold, each decision already made, is an idea which is completely foreign to the modern man. He wanders a cold, meaningless universe where all is chance and circumstance. He is but a brief light in a dark universe, and what awaits him is the endless, silent night of death. Slowly, the rot of nihilism strangles his soul. He becomes pale and ashen, a shade wandering the earth, as day by day he gives in to despair. But the man of overflowing health and vitality believes in fate and destiny. To him, modernity is no accidental aberration of history. To him, modernity is a challenge, and in taking up this challenge with Promethean will, he finds his supreme meaning. The man of health knows that the whole history of life has led to him and to his moment of struggle and triumph. In his body, he knows that his spirit was destined for this age, for this life, for this very moment. He says yes to life, and in aspiring to the heights, he affirms life. Only a sick animal, weak of will and beaten down by the spirit of gravity, sees life as suffering. This is the attitude of the spiritually stunted and the overly intellectual who seek to escape into the Platonic realm. They long for the green meadow of nirvana, heaven, virtual reality, or some other utopia in which they can finally rest, free of suffering. But the healthy animal, who has an excess of strength, energy, and will, sees life as a challenge, as overcoming, as striving, as constant transformation. He knows that each triumph requires a long climb, that beneath every beautiful surface there are terrible depths, that each act of creation is also an act of destruction. Nietzsche believed that the god Dionysus exemplified the creative frenzy and overflow of power which was necessary for the creation of the higher man. In Twilight of the Idols, Nietzsche writes, "Only in the Dionysian mysteries, in the psychology of the Dionysian condition, does the fundamental fact of the Hellenic instinct express itself, its will to life. What did the Hellenes procure in these mysteries? Eternal life, the eternal recurrence of life, the future promised and made sacred in the past, the triumphant yes to life, beyond death and change. True life as collective survival through reproduction, through the mysteries of sexuality." Thus, for the Greeks, the sexual symbol was the ultimate revered symbol, the authentic, deep meaning in all ancient piety. Every element of the act of reproduction, of pregnancy and birth, awoke the highest and most festive feelings. In the teachings of the mysteries, pain is declared holy. The pangs of the childbearer make pain in general holy. All becoming and growth, everything that vouches for the future, requires pain. For there to be the eternal joy of creation, for the will to life to affirm itself eternally, there must also eternally be the torment of the childbearer. All this is signified by the name Dionysus. I know no higher symbolism than this Greek symbolism, the symbolism of the Dionysian rites. In them, the deepest instinct of life, the instinct for the future of life, for the eternity of life, is expressed religiously, the very way to life, reproduction as the holy way. Nietzsche saw in Dionysus life in its highest form, life in abundance, excess, and frenzy, life exalting itself and its own creation. For the Greeks, sexuality represented the divine act of creation. However, for insects and many lower forms of life, reproduction serves simply as a means of rapid mass replication. It is only in ascendant life forms which strive for differentiation and the production of greater and greater specimens, that sexuality becomes holy. Nietzsche continues, the psychology of the orgiastic as an overflowing feeling of life and energy, where even pain works as a stimulant, gave me the key to the concept of the tragic, saying yes to life, even in its most strange and intractable problems, the will to life, celebrating its own inexhaustibility by sacrificing its highest types. That is what I called Dionysian. That is what I found as the bridge to the psychology of the tragic poet, not in order to be released from terror and pity, not in order to purify oneself of a dangerous emotion through its vehement discharge, but instead, beyond terror and pity, in order to be oneself, the eternal joy of becoming, that joy that also includes in itself the joy of destruction. To carve the Overman from the raw material of man, the stone must endure the wrath of the hammer and chisel. The stone must undergo 1,000 pressures and pains. Creation necessitates suffering. In nature, species are only improved through pressure. When this pressure is removed in civilization, many become soft and purposeless. Without the struggle for survival, their life lacks all meaning. They poison themselves with sterile pleasures, which are absent any creative purpose. But for others, the removal of this pressure and the alleviation of the struggle for mere survival provides them the opportunity to thrive and to gather to themselves an overflow of health and vitality. This is where Apollonian idealism becomes a necessity. We need the raw strength and power of the instincts to energize us, but we also need the idealistic vision of the artist to drive us and put pressure upon us. Prometheus is the perfect union of the Dionysian and the Apollonian. He has the overflowing health and strength of Dionysus, which allows him to affirm his fate and suffering, and yet he also possesses the idealism and artistic vision of Apollo, which drives him to defy it. Prometheus represents life's striving for ever higher, more beautiful and powerful forms against the spirit of gravity and the homogenized life of the herd. Prometheus is both creator and sacrifice, and thus an embodiment of the dualistic nature of creation. In this way, he is also a precursor to Christ. Prometheus sacrifices himself in service of his vision for mankind, and his suffering is justified in his creation. Every one of his actions and the whole of his fate reaches its pinnacle in man. In The Gay Science, Nietzsche writes, "Perhaps to a distant age, the whole of religion will appear as an exercise and prelude. Perhaps religion could have been the strange means of making it possible one day for a few individuals to enjoy the whole self-sufficiency of a god and all his power of self-redemption. Indeed, one may ask, did Prometheus first have to imagine having stolen light and pay for it before he could finally discover that he had created light by desiring light, and that not only man but also God was the work of his own hands and the clay in his hands? The higher type recognizes himself as a prelude to the Overman. Thus, his whole life becomes an act of creation. He does not restrain his creative will, and does not hesitate to promise more than could ever be fulfilled. He is overflowing with an excess of life, strength, and health. He laughs at the spirit of gravity when it creeps upon him in the night and chastises him for his arrogance. Could an amoeba imagine man? He says. Could an amoeba desire man? Yet I can imagine the Overman. My heart desires the Overman. And in imagining him and desiring him, I create him. This is my will. With Prometheus's gift of civilization, humanity entered upon a golden age of high culture. The arts and sciences flourished, and it seemed that not even the stars were beyond the reach of the dreams of their kings and the spires of their cities. But soon, people forgot the powers upon which their civilizations had been founded. The temples lay empty, the altars barren. They no longer remembered what it was like to live in the mud among their beasts, without warmth or light. They became decadent and neglectful, lulled into comfort by the wealth and prosperity of civilization. The priests and kings were no longer vigilant, and the descendants of Cain began to creep into the institutions and corrupt them. From the shadows, they stirred resentment in the hearts of the people and turned them against each other. Neighbor murdered neighbor in the street, and cities fell into civil war. Fire, which had once brought mankind the gift of civilization and carried the scent of burnt offerings to the gods, now carried up to the heavens the stench of plague and death. And seeing the temples burning, and man slaughtering and pillaging his way upon the earth, God resolved himself to wipe civilization from the earth and quench man's fire with a great deluge. But Deucalion, son of far-seeing Prometheus, had remained vigilant and clear-sighted amid the chaos. He had foreseen the coming destruction and labored to build a great ark and fill it with all the knowledge of civilization and the many teachings of his father. He took into the ark his wife, Pyrrha, and all his generations. He took also into the ark builders, scribes, blacksmiths, priests, and warriors, men well versed in all the arts of civilization. And when the heavens thundered, and lightning struck down the citadels of the cities, and water washed away their walls, he preserved his generations from the flood, and with them all the fruits of civilization. Some call him Noah, others Utnapishtim, for he is remembered by all the generations of man, and known by many names. Nature is like a vast ocean, churning, storming, filled with strange beasts. The hunter-gatherer way of life is akin to riding nature's waves in longboats and canoes. The hunter-gatherer way of life does not resist nature, but instead uses her flux and flow to its advantage. Civilization, however, is akin to building a castle in the waves. Civilization resists nature and goes against her natural flow. Waves beat at the walls of the castle, and it is always in danger of being pulled back into the sea. Hunter-gatherer societies can continue unchanged for thousands of years, with their traditions and lineages unbroken, because they exist in homeostasis with nature. But civilizations are always struggling against the pull of entropy and degeneration. Walls and roads must be maintained, territory defended, institutions and political bodies upheld. This is why civilizations collapse, and it just so happens that we are experiencing such a collapse in the West right now. If we want to understand our current predicament, we need only look to Rome, which serves as a near-perfect example of the life cycle of civilizations. Rome was founded by a martial, energized people, sons of Mars, thirsty for war and struggle. They inherited and adopted much of the culture of Greece, which they would eventually conquer and absorb into their empire. Their martial spirit is what allowed them to excel. Their ability to assemble well-trained legions, to build infrastructure, and to direct their warlike spirit in an organized and disciplined manner. But as Rome became a wealthy, world-dominating power, the ruling caste became decadent and their institutions were corrupted by power-hungry schemers and backstabbers. Men like Caesar and Marcus Aurelius were few and far between. I have no doubt that from the seats of the Senate glowered faces not unlike the ones which we see today in the ruling castes. Pale, grayish faces with cold eyes, hungry for power. Ultimately, the Romans' greatest strength would lead to their downfall. With the empire already weakened from cultural and economic collapse, a series of internal wars for control of the empire would leave it too weak to defend itself. The Western Roman Empire, overstretched and eating itself from within, would collapse under its own weight. But the Germanic tribes, who were still untamed and overflowing with violent, creative energy, took up the cultural inheritance and identity of Rome, just as the Romans had done to the Greeks, and established the next paradigm, ushering in a new golden age of flourishing civilization. It is from this medieval, Christian age that grew the spirit of modernity, the Faustian spirit, the scientific spirit. The spirit of our times has inherited from Christianity the desire to conquer nature. It is from this spirit that science was born. It is because of this spirit that Europeans sought out the wilderness of the Americas. It is in the name of this spirit that liberal democracy was formed as an attempt to level the hierarchies inherent in nature and bring about egalitarian societies. This spirit has brought the West great freedoms and luxuries, but it has also made us sick. We suffer from a deep-rooted misunderstanding of nature, both without and within, which has reached a catastrophe in the current health crisis. Just as happened to Rome, the spirit which gave birth to the modern Western nations is now bringing about their destruction. We have become decadent, and the values which once vitalized us and made us free are quickly turning us into a sickly species, born for servitude. The transhumanists are trying to follow the Faustian ethos to its conclusion in a total annihilation of human nature and complete subjugation of the body using technology. Thus they say no to life itself and to the very life force which flows through all of creation. But they are old, and their paradigm no longer seizes the imagination and motivates the will to create. They are like the power-hungry senators and generals of Rome attempting to seize the throne of an atrophied empire. But there are new barbarians at the gates. A new paradigm is rising. Just as Christianity took up the Roman spirit and at the same time inverted it, we take up the transhumanist spirit and turn it against their vision of a sterile, dystopian earth, ruled by machines and populated by the remnants of a servile humanity. We seek to overcome ourselves, not through the conquest and castration of nature and biology, but through embracing nature and the instincts and harnessing them to drive us to new heights. We do not seek comfort or utopia. We laugh at such pitiful visions of contentment. We desire pressure and challenge. We want to evolve. This revitalizing vision of a higher type of human being who voluntarily seeks out hardship, who chooses to sacrifice comfort for the creation of beauty, will be our ark in the coming flood. I see now everywhere, from the edges of our culture, where men are still untamed and filled with creative will, a higher type arising. And this gives me hope that the golden rays of a new paradigm of flourishing are chasing away the clouds of this stormy sky. A flood is coming, a civilizational eclipse more catastrophic than any seen before on the earth. But if we can navigate the stormy waters of the flood, when the thunder and lightning fade from the sky, we will find at last a shining rainbow, a bridge to our highest hopes, a bridge to the ultimate dream, the ultimate challenge, the ultimate gamble, a bridge to the Overman. Hercules, son of shining Zeus, son of fair Alcmene, more god than man, the earth was too delicate for your feet. The earth could not contain you. Your destiny was to dance with the stars and dine in the halls of the immortals. You restored order to civilization when men were weak and monsters savaged the lands. You freed Prometheus from his shackles. You held the world on your shoulders. You stole the apples of life. You taught us to overcome mankind and showed man what it is to live as a god. You showed us how far the arrows of longing can fly, and for that you are immortalized in the stars. When the flood passed, Deucalion strode among the foundations of a new world, imparting the wisdom of his father upon the people. A new dawn smiled upon mankind. Some had survived the flood in caves atop high mountains, and they, together with the inhabitants of the Ark, repopulated the earth. But in time, civilization became decadent again, and men became weak. The descendants of Cain prevailed over the descendants of Abel and Seth, and the institutions which once protected the people now tyrannized over them. Monsters crept in from the edges of civilization, threatening to swallow it, and there were no men strong or brave enough to fend them off. But Zeus, watching from on high, took pity on mankind and imparted a divine child upon white-armed Alcmene, granddaughter of Perseus. Hercules, when you were just an infant, jealous Hera sent 2 serpents to strangle the life from you and choke you with their venom. But you grabbed each by the throat, as one day you would the Hydra, and crushed them in your tiny hands. I name these 2 serpents Fate and Destiny, you said in your infant voice, which babbled sweetly like the Styx, and I shall trample them under my feet. As you grew, you were trained by the best teachers in the arts of war and culture. Like Abel with his flock, you strode among the people, defending them from beasts and tyrants alike with your mighty club. But Hercules, your divine strength was also a curse, and Hera, seeing your success as a hero, enchanted you with a divine madness. As you looked upon your trembling hands, stained with the blood of your own children, you remembered all the friends and mentors who had come to harm at your hands, and you felt yourself beyond redemption. Guilt and shame, like venom, made your limbs stiff and your heart heavy. For the sin of the slaughter of your family, the oracle at Delphi bade you serve your wicked brother, a son of Cain, and carry out every order he commanded. Thus began your great labor, your agony, and your triumph. Your feats are too many to list. The Nemean lion, the Lernaean hydra, the Aegean stables, the Cretan bull. Everywhere you tamed beasts and slew monsters with your godlike strength. But your final 2 labors were the most inhuman of all, a tremendous ascent to the heights, and a terrible descent into the depths. As you scaled the jagged cliffs of Olympus to seek out the wisdom of Prometheus, you remembered the great deeds of your youth, but also the trail of destruction you had left in your wake. You smashed Prometheus's chains with your club, and shot Zeus's eagle from the sky with your far-reaching bow. You now possess the divine fire, said Prometheus, the white sun dancing in his shining locks. One day man shall pluck the apples of life, and man, He that was once a worm of the earth shall become a god. I have foreseen this, but it is not yet time. Eden's gate still lies closed to man, blocked off by a great fire, and only the hand of an immortal can touch the fruit of life. Hercules, as you struggled up the snowy climbs of Mount Atlas, holding your lion skin tight about you to shield yourself from the Hyperborean wind, you remembered how it all began, how from the cradle you were destined for greatness. This is my fate, you said into the blinding snow. This is my destiny, you said into the white sun. And as you beheld the serpent, Ladon, winding its way about the tree of life atop Mount Atlas, you remembered how, even as an infant, Hera's serpents could not kill you. You took the heavens from Atlas's bronze shoulders, and his immortal hand plucked the golden apples for you. And you would have remained there, forgotten in the north, if it were not for the guidance of Prometheus. With his clever words in your mouth, you tricked Atlas into taking back the burden of the heavens, and left with your golden prize. For your final labor, you descended into the underworld and dragged the guard dog of Hades up to the light. You conquered death and grasped immortality, and you would have lived the happy life of a hero if it were not for the life-haters. These sons of Cain schemed against you, for they saw that you were the most mighty of all the lineage of Abel, and they hated you for your greatness. They poisoned you with the venom of the Hydra, and as your blood boiled and you bellowed in agony, you leapt upon the sacrificial fire which you had prepared for Zeus, and made it your own funeral pyre. And as you burned, you cried out to the heavens, "Destiny and fate, these are the chains which bind me, these are the wings which carry me to greatness. Now I am like Prometheus, and Zeus's eagle takes its sacrifice from me for my transgressions. But my sin is justified. In this divine fire, my sin is justified." And thus Hercules became a god. Hercules exemplifies a higher type of man, courageous, careless, mocking, a man who, as Nietzsche writes, has organized the chaos of his passions, given style to his character, and become creative. Hercules is the opposite of the modern man, his shadow. He is unrestrained, a man of instinct, overflowing with primal energy, the classical version of Giga Chad, if you will. Hercules is a civilized beast, but a barely civilized one, and because of this, he leaves a trail of destruction in his wake. This is why, as Nietzsche said, the higher man must organize the chaos of his passions. Nietzsche contrasted the higher man who seeks to harness the instincts in service of his creative will with the priestly practice of asceticism, in which life turns against itself. The ascetic seeks to cauterize his instincts and cut out the very root of life, while the higher man embraces them as the primal fountain of life which drives all living things to seek out challenge and resistance. Many vitalizing ascetic practices are being revived in modernity. The disciplines of lifting, fasting, meditation, cold showers, and abstinence. But often, practices like abstinence prove ineffective for the modern man. He becomes caught in a constant cycle of abstinence and indulgence. This is because the modern man is not in touch with the instincts which he seeks to harness in the first place. Modern man suffers from a chronic disconnect from his natural instinct, and thus his attempt at ascetic practice often end up being of the priestly type, only alienating him further from the instincts which should guide him and give him power. To renew civilization, we do not need men of the priestly type. We need men of the warrior type with an excess of energy, men ready for challenge and danger, in harmony with their instincts, even at the danger of being overcome by them. We must reconnect with the primal well of life before we can channel it. We must free the minotaurs of our passions before we can tame them. Or, as Nietzsche wrote, "Of all evil I deem you capable, therefore I want good from you." Verily, I have often laughed at the weaklings who thought themselves good because they had no claws. Hydra, one of Hercules' most well-remembered labors, perfectly symbolizes the problem we face in modernity. Every time one of the Hydra's heads is severed, two more take its place. It is only by cutting off the Hydra's main head that it can be conquered. Amid its jungle of heads, our Hydra, at its core, is what Nietzsche called the spirit of gravity. It is poor health, weakness of will, apathy, decadence, and entropic malaise hanging over our civilization, all symptoms of life in decline. A modern man may slay the demon of video game addiction only to fall prey to social media, or worse. And if he can slay the numerous digital addictions which are each capable of swallowing a man, then he may fall prey to the plastics and chemicals in our food and clothing, poor diet, pharmaceutical addiction, or any number of other pitfalls. For the task of slaying our Hydra, a breed of great men must arise. Men of the type that Hercules was, demigods and monster slayers. Our species senses the need for these types. There is a biological and spiritual imperative for a higher type of man who can thrive despite the perils of modernity, who can retain his health even in the most toxic conditions. There is something in life which craves overcoming, which craves freedom, which needs the clear and fresh air of the Olympian heights of excellence and striving. And it is this need which will call a new generation of half-gods to take on the challenge of modernity. Previously, we have talked about how Nietzsche understood the Prometheus myth as a justification of human evil, and thus the antithesis of the Christian concept of original sin, which lays a burden of guilt on all of humanity. In Birth of Tragedy, he writes, "What distinguishes the Greek notion is the sublime view of active sin as the characteristically Promethean virtue. With that, the ethical basis for pessimistic tragedy has been found, the justification of human evil, meaning both human guilt and the human suffering it entails. Hercules' labors are an endeavor to free himself from the guilt of his own violent nature. In Hercules, the destructive aspect of human nature is justified, and thus a return to the shame-free state of Eden is achieved. This is symbolized by Hercules' theft of the golden apples of immortality, and his eventual ascension to godhood after death. For, as outlined in Genesis, he who eats of the fruit of knowledge and the fruit of life becomes like a god. Hercules shows that not only can we return to the paradisal state of Eden, in harmony with the instincts and the will of life, but that we can also ascend even to godhood. By freeing Prometheus, Hercules symbolically takes his place as the new founder and symbol of civilization. Prometheus no longer has to pay the price for civilization, for it is now reconstituted by Hercules. Similarly, when Hercules momentarily takes the place of Atlas, he becomes the axis mundi, the very axis of the earth around which the heavens revolve. This symbolizes Hercules becoming the archetypal hero of the new age, the center of the divine drama laid out in the stars. But the hero's ascension to godhood must be preceded by a descent into the underworld. For, as Nietzsche writes in Thus Spake Zarathustra, it is the same with man as with the tree. The more he seeks to rise into the heights and light, the more vigorously do his roots struggle earthward, downward, into the dark and deep, into evil. The path to the higher man is not a simple path of ascent. It also requires a journey into the depths, into the inferno of the passions. into labyrinths of the human psyche long forgotten, where ancient minotaurs wander, into Hades, where subterranean beasts of instinct thirst for the light. If one wishes to ascend to the heights, he must first penetrate the depths. If one wishes to go over, he must also go under. Before we attempt any Apollonian discipline of the instincts, before we order the chaos of our passions, we modern men must first reconnect with the chaotic, violent, vitalizing frenzy of the instincts. Like Hercules, we must fix our arrows of longing upon the stars. Like Hercules, we must embrace our instincts and live passionately and boldly. Only then might we eat of the apples of life and live again in harmony with nature, each moment a pure expression of the primal life force. Only then might we live like gods. It is time for man to fix his goal. It is time for man to plant the seed of his highest hope. His soil is still rich enough for it, but that soil will one day be poor and exhausted, and no lofty tree will any longer be able to grow upon it. Alas, there comes a time when man will no longer be able to launch the arrow of his longing beyond man, and the string of his bow will have unlearned to whiz. I say to you, one must still have chaos in oneself to give birth to a dancing star. I say to you, you still have chaos in yourself. The walls of the labyrinth are close and oppressive. Cold sweat runs down your back. Right, left, right again. The air is dark and humid, thick with the stench of death. Blindly, you follow the golden thread between your fingers. Blindly, you follow the glimmer of your desire. It draws you further into the darkness. In the belly of the labyrinth, something is stirring. Your fear is bitter in your mouth. Then there is a thunderous bellow as the beast charges you. Hot breath on your skin and the crunch of bones under you as you trample back and forth. You hold tight to the Minotaur's horns as it presses down on you. Never before have you tested yourself against such a violent, primal force. You are sure that you will be overcome, overwhelmed, devoured. Then you feel hot blood running down your forearms and washing over your heaving chest, and the metallic taste of victory fills your nostrils. You stand triumphant over the fallen beast and feel its energy filling you, pooling in your belly, rushing through your limbs, and you feel so light that you think you could fly. In the last video on Hercules, we discussed the untapped power of the instincts. In this video, we will discuss how to reclaim and discipline these instincts. When Theseus and Prometheus descend into the underworld and stop to rest, the rocks begin to grow around them and they become stuck to the earth. But Hercules, descending into Hades to complete his final labor, frees them. You too are paralyzed and stuck to the rocks, and it is your instincts which will save you. Your instincts were given to you by nature to guide you triumphantly through life. Your instincts have evolved to help you succeed. Because of your instincts, there is an innate intelligence in your body, an intelligence which has been honed and perfected over millions of years of evolution. Within you, the spirit of life guides you. She whispers to you softly with the voice of beauty. She calls you to conquer, to grow, to surpass all things thus far created by her will. But we no longer live the nomadic, hunter-gatherer lifestyle to which our instincts are adapted. We now live in the maze-like streets of cities and the endless sprawl of suburbs. After life in the jungles, forests, and open plains, life in the city is a confined, oppressive existence. The very structure of the city prevents us from expressing our instincts. Our drives to explore, to expand, to conquer, and to own space all must be repressed as we conform to the physical and social confines of agricultural and industrial life. Only the ruling castes retain their relative freedom, as the majority must devote their hours to labor. Those who will not conform to this oppressive lifestyle either become civilization-renewing heroes, like Hercules, Alexander, and Caesar, or their spirit is broken and they become criminals and misfits, beasts who have grown to distrust their own instinct and view their own nature as evil. This frustration of the natural instincts has only been worsened by our entrance into the labyrinth of the digital. The internet is a global web which serves to connect us, but this web is also filled with spiders, quivering at the thought of unsuspecting prey becoming entrapped in their shimmering web. With the invention of smartphones, the most sinister of the priestly types have gained direct access to our psyche. These life-haters, who seek to use our instincts to manipulate us and profit off of us, have never had an easier time at deceiving and ensnaring their prey. The instincts which once guided us have now become a source of suffering, either because we are unable to express them, or because they are manipulated and turned against us. In the first societies, the uncontrollable and violent nature of the instincts was a threat to civilization and the social order. But after thousands of years of repression and socialization, first in agricultural society, then industrial society, and now in the landscape of the digital, we have the opposite problem. We are over-socialized and repressed. We have become distrustful of our instincts, which are incompatible with our modern environment, both physically and socially. Our consciousness has been forced to become a labyrinth of hidden desires and wants, mirroring the maze-like streets of our cities, and in the catacombs of our unconscious, beneath the veil of civilization, is our shadow, which we have cast out of the light of consciousness, a minotaur of primal desire and passion. And so our instincts, which were once nature's angels, have become civilization's demons. The ultimate end of the repression and demonization of the instincts can be seen in the ascetic ideal of priests. The ascetic seeks to uproot his instincts and free himself from desire. Since he cannot reconcile his moral character with the ferocity and amorality of his instincts, he views them as demons, and his desires manifest as resentment. Thus, his will to life is expressed as a pathological, sterile desire for tyrannical control over himself and the world, which are the sources of his suffering. Nietzsche writes, "The ascetic ideal arises out of the instinct for protection and salvation in a degenerating life, which seeks to keep itself going by any means and struggles for existence. It indicates a partial physiological inhibition and exhaustion, against which those deepest instincts for living continually fight on with new methods and innovations. The ascetic ideal serves to protect a weak organism. It serves to rationalize life and make it bearable for those who are forced to live in unbearably restrictive conditions. It is life's final attempt at preserving herself in an organism whose will prefers its own destruction over the pain of life. The priestly ideal is simply the will to power expressed in a sickly and declining life form. Yet this ascetic ideal, more often than not, fails at preserving life because its adherents do not reproduce. Life in this state begins to calcify, like Theseus and Prometheus stuck to the rocks of Hades. This is the state of exhaustion and sickness which so many of us today are being swallowed by. We sit in front of our televisions, in our office chairs, paralyzed, unable to move forward, unable to break free from the grip of death. Only the Herculean beast of instinct can free us from our deathly slumber. The repression and demonization of the instincts creates what Jung referred to as the shadow, which manifests on both an individual and collective level. The shadow is made up of all the instincts and values which have been deemed evil by a society and subsequently repressed into the unconscious. But the shadow is not evil. In his book, Ion, Carl Jung writes, "If it has been believed hitherto that the human shadow was the source of all evil, it can now be ascertained on closer investigation that the unconscious man, that is, his shadow, does not consist of only morally reprehensible tendencies, but also displays a number of good qualities, such as normal instincts, appropriate reactions, realistic insights, creative impulses, etc." To discover that a primal beast of instinct dwells within the civilized halls of our psyche is a terrifying experience. Yet to shrink from the shadow and label it as evil is only to further repress it and make it more violent and dangerous, for these primal instincts will find a way out. One way or another, nature will have her way. As Nietzsche writes, "You aspire to free heights. Your soul thirsts for the stars, but your wicked instincts, too, thirst for freedom. Your wild dogs want freedom. They bark with joy in their cellar when your spirit plans to open all prisons." The proper way forward is to confront the shadow and embrace it, for our shadow contains what we need most. If we are to become heroes, we must first wrestle with our shadow. The opposite of the ascetic ideal is the heroic ideal. The hero wrestles with life and embraces it fully with all of his being, even in the face of suffering and death. The hero does not suffer from his own instincts. He knows that his passions and desires are the voice of nature calling him to greatness and challenging him to adventure. The hero laughs at the life-negating morality of priests. The hero's virtue does not arise from moralizing and rationalizing life. It arises from the discipline and sharpening of his inborn instincts and desires. The hero's passions are his virtues. In order to ascend to the heights, he must harness the most primal parts of himself and organize the chaos of his passions behind his singular ideal and goal. The life-haters have told you that your nature is evil. They have taught you to be ashamed of your desires and passions, but they are nihilists, and their morality is a rot creeping up the branches of the tree of life. If you follow the golden thread of your desire, it will lead you deep into the labyrinth of your psyche. There you will find your shadow, a violent minotaur of desire and passion which has been locked away in the chambers of your unconscious. By wrestling with this beast, you wrestle with the spirit of life, and by conquering this beast and submitting it to your will, you will regain the Herculean well of instinctual power which has been lost to our collective shadow. Then the spirit of life will flow through you again, and you will be saved from your paralysis. Then your desire will draw you towards the heights, and towards your highest hope. Then man will stand at the great noon, halfway between beast and God, and no shadow will fall at his feet. Then man will be on his way towards the Superman. Once you had passions and called them evil, but now you have only your virtues. They grew out of your passions. You set your highest goal in the heart of those passions. Then they became your virtues and joys. And though you were of the race of the hot-tempered, or of the lustful, or of the fanatical, or the vengeful, in the end, all your passions became virtues, and all your devils, angels. Once you had wild dogs in your cellar, but they changed at last into birds and charming singers.